Hey y'all, it's West Virginia History with Mrs. B, and today we are going to talk all about the judging process for the social studies fair. And this video is for judges, so they know how to participate in the judging process for the social studies fair. So first of all, if you're watching this and you have agreed to be a judge, thank you. Judging is not the easiest thing in the world to do. Because you want to do a great job on behalf of our kids. And so sometimes it gets really close, really tough to make those decisions. And hopefully this video will help you in that process. So before I want to begin going over how to do the process, I just want to remind everybody that you are going to encounter students of varying abilities, differing abilities. You may have students that are participating in the judges process who have IEPs and 504s. Just remember that every kid that is coming in front of you, they are giving you the best that they have. They're not going to turn in a subpar performance. And so keep that in mind as you go ahead. These kids are giving you their best that they've been able to produce maybe on their own or without a lot of help. And so, that is really important. Varying abilities, they're bringing you the best that they could do in figuring out the social studies fair process. So, here's how to judge a project. So even before the student arrives, make sure that you review the board so you can look at it close up. Also make sure that you go over their abstract. When the student arrives, be friendly. Try to relieve their nervousness, their anxiousness. That really helps with kids. Say, we're here, we're going to have a conversation. Be super supportive. Because for a lot of kids, this is their first time actually talking in front of people that they're not related to or they're not in a classroom with. Please make sure that you say hello and that you introduce yourself. However, they are not allowed to introduce themselves, nor are they allowed to tell you where they're from. So if you're on a school fair, of course, they all go to the school in which you're judging. If you're at a county fair, you know what county they're from, but you may not know what school they're from. And so you don't want to ask that because that is a huge part of the rules, that social studies fair is supposed to be anonymous and that everybody has an equal shot of participating. Okay, so next comes the students presenting their speech. And so that's the formal presentation. This is really important. Every student who participates in the social studies fair should be given the opportunity to deliver their complete speech uninterrupted. So once it begins, do not interrupt. Before asking questions, ask something like, have you finished your presentation, or do you have more to tell us before we ask some questions? So give students that opportunity to give their full speech. You might want to prompt them before they begin that speech by saying something like, if you would like to give your presentation, you can begin now. But as the student is giving that presentation, do not interrupt them. Remember that there is a 5-minute limit for individual projects, 10 minutes for group projects. However, if they're running on, and they're well over the time, which I do recommend using your phone as a timer, but say they're like 8, 9, 10 minutes in, if it's an individual or like a group project goes 15, 20 minutes, you're going to want to interrupt because you're going to be, if you're in one of my fairs, on a time schedule. So you don't want to run over that time. And you will want to mark on their card that they ran over time. You might even want to put how long it took for the presentation to go. But again, unless they're running way over, don't interrupt them at like 5:01, because what you practice at home may not be what happens during a presentation process. So when the students are finished, you can ask questions. I really encourage asking questions, But as I always try to tell people, don't play gotcha. Just because you might be well versed in the project that they're presenting doesn't mean you should ask really, what am I looking for? Esoteric questions that the student may not know the answer to. You don't want to freak them out, okay? You want to encourage kids to talk. And so the kind of questions that get kids to talk are pretty open-ended. So sample questions that judges can ask, and these are ones that I always tell judges you can use. It can be something like, why did you choose your topic? They're probably going to tell you something similar to what they have written in number 1 on their abstract, but let them talk about why they chose the topic that they did and why they chose to go into the investigative process as they did. Next question that you could ask about, you like say they have a graph or a chart or something on their board or a map. Ask them to explain that chart. Ask them to explain that graph. Ask them to explain what that map that's on their board is displaying. Another good question, very open-ended, is what's the most important thing you learned about your project? Keep that one in the back of your project. Why did you choose this project? Explain this chart. What's the most important thing you learned? And it could be that they talk about something that they learned about themselves in this process instead of it just being, something about the content. So I like open-ended questions. You could, if they have a display, ask them how they constructed the display. You could ask them how they designed their board, what their process was for designing that board. And ask them questions about how they found their information, especially because you want to see if they've found varying information sources. Did they just do a Google search, or are they going more in depth and using books and peer review articles and primary sources and all those different types of sources? So you want to see that, you can see it on the abstract, but ask them to talk about how they found their sources and their investigative process. Again, during questioning, make sure you make students feel very at ease. If they don't understand the question, you definitely should clarify the question so that they understand that question. Also important, don't ask them questions that are unrelated to their topic. So for example, if you're doing a project about Abraham Lincoln, it might not be great to ask them a question about Ulysses S. Grant. Even though the two are related, the project's focus is on Abraham Lincoln. And so you want to stick in that lane. Stick in what the students have written about on their abstract, because they're going to know the information that's on their abstract and is on their board. So for a closure, once you've finished and the students have given their presentation, once the students have answered question, give the students an opportunity to give you one last, anything else they'd like to share with you, because they might, as they're going through the question process, remember something that they might want to share. And so give them that opportunity. And before the student leaves, please be encouraging and give them a positive statement afterwards of, encouragement. Things like, you did a great job. Well done on your project. Great, presentation. We loved your display board. Your abstract is really thorough. But we want students to feel empowered, especially because social studies fair may be the first time a student has competed in an academic-based competition. We want them to participate and to keep coming back. We want them to feel empowered that they did a good job. And so for my fairs that I do, I encourage, if you have a partner, a judging partner, that you each have a scratch paper that you take notes on while the students are presenting. And then you're going to want to complete one clean card that you turn in as the final card, which you agree on the scores, which, if you have projects that are close in scores, you may not want to write a final tally or final scores until you see how everything hashes out. Like say you have 4 projects in a category, you may not want to do the scoring like all the way until you've seen all 4, so you see where they rank first, second, third, honorable mention. So, and turn in that final card. I will also remind you, these kids can't read cursive. And so if you write something on their card, please write it in print, because it's very stressful to kids to not be able to understand what the comments are, and comments are so important to this whole process. So please print your comments. And I always encourage people, if there's something that a student didn't get a 5 on, explain in the comment bar what they would need to do to get a 5. And so let me show you. Here's the scorecard. This is the comment bar. Okay. So in this little comment bar, you can fill that bad boy up. And let me just tell you, when I do student projects, I fill this thing up because I want my students to know what they can improve upon to get full credit. And so that's really important. If students use your scorecard, your notes, it's kind of like their little guide to, especially if they win, how do they improve to move on? Because if they win, they want to know what they've got to do, what they've got to fix to move on. So anything that they don't get a 5 on, make a comment of how they could fix that and improve that. So important to note as well, ties, if you have a tie, like you're like, they're tied, you will use the abstract to break any ties that you have. And so if there's like 2 99s, you're going to go back to the abstract, put them side by side, compare them, and you will probably, hopefully, see a winner. And remember that abstracts, that the questions 1 through 6 can only be 3 pages long. Okay, so if they've written over, that's a problem. On a lower level fair, like a county fair or a school fair, if you see grammatical errors, take your pencil and circle those things, because students need to know what they need to fix. And so they may not have folks who have read over their things and vetted them, in detail before the school fair. Especially before the school fair, and maybe not even before the county fair. So it's really important that if you see anything on the abstract, just circle it. You don't have to like annotate all over the whole thing, but if there's a grammatical issue, circle it with your pencil. I always ask my judges to write in pencil, just because you don't want to need a new card. So when you're sitting down deliberating who's going to win, remember you need to work closely with your partner to determine a first, second, third, and maybe even an honorable mention for the division, category, and type that you're judging. So for example, that could be Division 1 U.S. History individual, because there might be 4, 5, 6, 10 projects depending on how many entries from, how many schools that you might have. And so you want to sit down and figure that out. Now, if nobody is worthy of moving on, or a project needs a great deal of work, you might not want to give a first place. However, if there's a project that shows a great deal of potential, I would encourage you to have a first place. Just leave lots and lots and lots of feedback again in that bar of what they can do to improve. So, for a project to get a first place, it must have a score of 90 or above. To get a second place, it must have a score of 80 or above. To be a third place project, it must have a score of 70 or above. So, you can, like I said, give an honorable mention. Honorable mentions are not required, but if there's a really good project that was not first, second, or third, and you want to give it a shout out, you can. That is up to you. if you are judging in like a county with like Jackson, which is where I am, we do cover sheets. So you're going to denote those things on the cover sheet. You'll put the project number, the project title under first, second, third, and honorable mention. So make sure you check your math, and we will be double checking your math as well at the scorers table. We'll double check that math. So you want to make sure your scores are right, because kids are going to pour over those scorecards. And so, for example, if you give something an 89 at the bottom and it's actually a 90, they're going to reach out and say, should I have gotten first place? Does this change things? So do your math correctly. So every category on the scorecard is 5 points. How I do it, if you're doing math in your head, it's easier just to go through and wherever there's something that's not a 5, you can just add those up and then subtract them from 100. That's how I do it to keep myself organized. Again, to the comments, tell students all the things that they can do to fix so that they can get 5s. But it's also really important that you leave constructive feedback so they feel that they were successful. If you saw something they did really well, like they did a really good quote, or they were really engaging with their eyes and their conversational style, note that, because kids want to know not only what they need to fix, but they also need to know what they're doing well as well. That's really important to them. You can use this scorecard. I'm going to talk a little bit about the scorecard before I get off here. But this scorecard is really open-ended. And so you need to know how this thing works before you start judging. So abstracts are worth the most points. They're 40 out of 100. Oral presentations, 35 out of 100. The board is 25 out of 100. A lot of people think if you have a super flashy board, you're going to win. No, content is what matters most. And it's that abstract, which is laying on the table, and it is that oral presentation. So when you're looking at the abstract part of the scorecard, so the first question asks, purpose of investigation is well defined. You'll find that in number 1 on the abstract. It has, the second point is quality essential questions, research questions. That's number 2 on the abstract. So these all correlate. The next question says employees appropriate research methods. That's question number 3. The abstract is free of grammatical, punctuation, and spelling errors. It does not exceed 3 pages plus bibliography. That is a general question. The next one says written summary provides a comprehensive overview, purpose, research methods, findings, conclusions. The research methods you can find in like 3 and 4 because they talk about their process, but the rest of that summary is in number 5. Conclusions, that's found in number 6, and that point is conclusions are supported by sound evidence and tied back to the research questions. So the questions in number 2, how did they answer those in number 6? And there's a separate 5-point thing for project just goes beyond reporting facts. They're analyzing information. They're drawing connections between ideas, events, time periods. They're showing that you hear them say, this project is relevant, or this point is relevant, because that's really important. And if they're doing a project like sociology or psychology, you're going to see them making maybe future predictions. But future predictions typically does not apply to a straight history category. So be aware of that. So if students, you can't, with history, maybe you can predict, but we want students to stick with what is instead of what ifs. And then the last point in the abstract category is it asks you to make sure that references the bibliography is properly cited in MLA, APA, etc. Typically, you're going to see mostly MLA. If you want to review MLA bibliographies, I recommend checking out the Purdue OWL. Just go to Google and type in Purdue, Purdue, OWL, OWL, and type in like MLA. And so their whole style guide will pop up as like the first Google search, and you can do the same for APA. But most of my students, like I said, use MLA. For the second section on the scorecard, it talks about oral presentation. The first point that you can get 5 points for is introduction captures audience's attention, provides a clear statement. This is that hook at the beginning. Do they hook you in, and do they tell you what you're learning about? The next one is this style creative, well organized, limited use of notes. So on this, at a school fair, typically this is the student's first time giving this presentation to others. So they're going to be much more attached to their speech than, say, at the state fair. Because by the time we get to the state fair, it's April. Whereas, a school fair is January. And so they've just created their project. They're still getting comfortable. And so give them some grace. Because remember, there are all these different points. And if you get a low score there, that could knock you out of, placement. So just make comments of how they could improve. One thing I encourage students to use is these little note cards with the rings. This makes it more conversational. However, students may use pieces of paper to read from, like, say, standing there like this with a speech. Just make sure you're focusing in on, are they conversational? Are they able to look up instead of they read from a speech? Because at a school fair, 9 times out of 10, this is their first time doing this. So they still need some practice. The third point says students make eye contact with the judges. They speak in a clear and confident voice. That they have facial expressions and body language that shows their interest and enthusiasm. Again, you can judge that a little bit more easily, like dial it back on a school or county level versus the state level. The next one is that presentation shows a strong level of understanding of your purpose, your content, your findings, your conclusion. So the students are using that abstract that you've looked at that's right in front of them, and they are using that to write their speech. And typically how I have my students do their projects is they do their abstract first, then they create their board, and then they write their speech. So then they know what they're trying to communicate when they write that speech. The next section says students use elements of the physical display to support or enhance their presentation. So are they talking with their board? Are they showing elements of their board as they're giving their speech? Or are they just standing in front of it and they're not engaging with what they've created? The next one is closing, as it has an appropriate summary. That they're tying up all of the ends of what they've been saying in their presentation. So you want to have another closing that, gets at what all they've talked about and then hooks you at the end. And then the last one is you give up to 5 points for answering the questions. And typically stick with those really open-ended, easy to answer questions. And I think students will be pretty comfortable in answering those. The third section on the board, I'm going to talk about those 5 points. So display is self-explanatory and highlights the most relevant information, that you could walk up to the board and figure out their topic, and that they're hitting the highlights of their speech and their abstract, that their information is arranged coherently, that you understand it has some kind of flow, that it's creative or unique. this question is just so open-ended, and you could really like hurt a kid's feelings. Like if they get to the state fair and you give them like a 1 or a 2 on this when they've been hauling this board around since January. So, it doesn't have to be super flashy. And I think that's something I want to get across that's important. Social studies fair winners should just not be the people that have put the most money into a board. Students who use school materials should have the same opportunity to participate and do well as someone who puts hundreds of dollars into a board. The board is not the be-all end-all. It's what the students have learned, and that's communicated in that abstract, in that speech. So if you can make recommendations on how to improve, like say they take a marker and write on a board and you want them to print something, do that. Give them, color recommendations. If they've used like 10 colors, just tell them to use 1 or 2. But this one is that question that can really hurt students' feelings. I've seen it happen time and time again. Remember, we're comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. You don't want to compare a student's project to the fanciest, flashiest project that you've ever seen, because we want this to be equitable and for everybody to have the opportunity. So if they do a great job with simple materials, then reward them for that. Don't just take a bunch of points and hurt a kid's feelings because they, didn't have the money to spend, hundreds of dollars to create a fancy board. The next one is display is neat, well organized, free from grammatical, spelling, and punctuation errors. If there's any errors on the board, please write that on the abstract, on the scorecard, so that they know what they need to fix. Also that they're using artifacts, charts, photos, technological devices to enhance their display. We're going to see, I think, more and more technology being used in social studies fair. I think we'll still continue to have like the display boards, but you're going to see students using, maybe PowerPoints or other things to show like data. They may show recorded interviews. Reward them for that they've done that. But those things should not take the place of their presentation. So what I typically tell students, if it's an individual project, no more than like a minute of a video clip. If it's a group project, no more than 2 minutes of a video clip. But if students, for example, put like QR codes or something on the board, get out your phone and, check those out and see what supplemental information they've included. So before I, end, I want to wrap up a few things. We're here to support students. So, remember, students are doing their best, so you give them your best. Be complimentary, be constructive. Don't play gotcha questions. Listen to the entire speech. You can time it so if they go over or not. Be there. I look at it as like your constructive cheerleader. Like these students are kind of trusting you with this thing that they've created that they're really proud of. And so you can either uplift students or you can destroy students by how you engage with them and the things that you write on the scorecard. So I want my students to feel empowered, and even if they don't win, I want them to want to participate and try to win next year. And so the way that we do that is by the experience that they have with the judges. So again, thank you so much for judging the social studies fair, and take all of these things into consideration as you go into the social studies fair process. If you ever have any questions about judging, specifics, you can always drop me a line. My email address is abarnette@boe.jack.k12.wv.us. Thank you so much for being willing to participate as a judge in the Social Studies Fair, and we will catch you on another episode of West Virginia History with Mrs. B. Thanks, y'all, for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to West Virginia History with Mrs. B on both Facebook and YouTube.